You're listening to Midwest Coven Cast Presents Weekend Reads. I'm Marilyn of Midwest Coven Cast. Here in Season 3 of Weekend Reads, we will be making our way through the 1922 abridgment of Sir James Frazer's The Golden Bough. You can visit MidwestCovenCast.com to find podcast extras, including a free online copy of the text. Consider supporting Midwest Coven Cast and Weekend Reads on Patreon for access to additional materials, like a serialized official Midwest Coven Cast Presents Weekend Reads ebook with additional notes about the text and some editorial modernizations straight from, well, me. Now, Coven, it is time to cozy up with your coffee or tea and enjoy this episode of Weekend Reads. Chapter 48, The Corn Spirit as an Animal. Subsection 1. Animal embodiments of the corn spirit. In some of the examples which I have cited to establish the meaning of the term neck as applied to the last sheaf, the corn spirit appears in animal form as a gander, a goat, a hare, a cat, and a fox. This introduces us to a new aspect of the corn spirit, which we must now examine. By doing so, we shall not only have fresh examples of killing the god, but may hope also to clear up some points which remain obscure in the myths and worship of Adonis, Attis, Osiris, Dionysus, Demeter, and Virbius. Amongst the many animals whose form the corn spirit is supposed to take are the wolf, dog, hare, fox, cock, goose, quail, cat, goat, cow, oxbull, pig, and horse. In one or other of these shapes, the corn spirit is often believed to be present in the corn, and to be caught or killed in the last sheaf. As the corn is being cut, the animal flees before the reapers, and if a reaper is taken ill on the field, he is supposed to have stumbled unwittingly on the corn spirit, who has thus punished the profane intruder. It is said the rye wolf has got hold of him. The harvest goat has given him a push. The person who cuts the last corn or binds the last sheaf gets the name of the animal, as the rye wolf, the rye sow, the oats goat, and so forth, and retains the name sometimes for a year. Also, the animal is frequently represented by a puppet made out of the last sheaf, or of wood, flowers, and so on, which is carried home amid rejoicings on the last harvest wagon. Even where the last sheaf is not made up in animal shape, it is often called the rye wolf, the hare, goat, and so forth. Generally, each kind of crop is supposed to have its special animal, which is caught in the last sheaf, and called the rye wolf, the barley wolf, the oats wolf, the pea wolf, or the potato wolf, according to the crop. But sometimes the figure of the animal is only made up once for all at getting in the last crop of the whole harvest. Sometimes the creature is believed to be killed by the last stroke of the sickle or scythe, but oftener it is thought to live so long as there is corn still unthreshed, and to be caught in the last sheaf threshed. Hence the man who gives the last stroke with the flail is told that he has got the corn sow, the threshing dog, or the like. When the threshing is finished, a puppet is made in the form of the animal, and this is carried by the thresher of the last sheaf to a neighboring farm, where the threshing is still going on. This again shows that the corn spirit is believed to live wherever the corn is still being threshed. Sometimes the thresher of the last sheaf himself represents the animal, and if the people of the next farm, who are still threshing, catch him, they treat him like the animal he represents, by shutting him up in the pigsty, calling him with the cries commonly addressed to pigs, and so forth. These general statements will now be illustrated by examples. Subsection 2. The corn spirit as a wolf or dog. We begin with the corn spirit conceived as a wolf or dog. This conception is common in France, Germany, and Slavonic countries. Thus, when the wind sets the corn in wave-like motion, the peasants often say, "The wolf is going over or through the corn." The rye wolf is threshing over the field. The wolf is in the corn, and the mad dog is in the corn. The big dog is there. When children wish to go into the cornfields to pluck ears or gather the blue cornflowers, they are warned not to do so, for the big dog sits in the corn, or the wolf sits in the corn and will tear you in pieces. The wolf will eat you. The wolf against whom the children are warned is not a common wolf, for he is often spoken of as the corn wolf, rye wolf, or the like. Thus they say, "The rye wolf will come and eat you up, children. The rye wolf will carry you off," and so forth. Still, he has all the outward appearance of a wolf, For in the neighborhood of Fehlenhof, East Prussia, when a wolf was seen running through a field, the peasants used to watch whether he carried his tail in the air or dragged it on the ground. If he dragged it on the ground, they went after him and thanked him for bringing them a blessing, and even set titbits before him. But if he carried his tail high, they cursed him and tried to kill him. Here the wolf is the corn spirit, whose fertilizing power is in his tail. Both dog and wolf appear as embodiments of the corn spirit in harvest customs. Thus, in some parts of Silesia, the person who cuts or binds the last sheaf is called the wheat dog or the peas pug. But it is in the harvest customs of the northeast of France that the idea of the corn dog comes out most clearly. Thus, when a harvester, through sickness, weariness, or laziness, cannot or will not keep up with the reaper in front of him, they say, "The white dog passed near him. He has the white bitch," or "The white bitch has bitten him." In the Vosges, the harvest May is called the dog of the harvest, and the person who cuts the last handful of hay or wheat is said to kill the dog. About Lons-le-Saulnier, in the Jura, the last sheaf is called the bitch. In the neighborhood of Verdun, the regular expression for finishing the reaping is, "They are going to kill the dog." And at Epinal, they say, according to the crop, "We kill the wheat dog, or the rye dog, or the potato dog." In the rain, it is said of the man who cuts the last corn, "He is killing the dog of the harvest." At Doux, in the Tyrol, the man who gives the last stroke at threshing is said to strike down the dog. And at Annabergen, near Stade, he is called, according to the crop, corn pug, rye pug, wheat pug. So with the wolf. In Silesia, when the reapers gather round the last patch of standing corn to reap it, they are said to be about to catch the wolf. In various parts of Mecklenburg, where the belief in the corn wolf is particularly prevalent, everyone fears to cut the last corn, because they say that the wolf is sitting in it. Hence every reaper exerts himself to the utmost in order not to be the last, and every woman similarly fears to bind the last sheaf, because the wolf is in it. So both among the reapers and the binders, there is a competition not to be the last to finish. And in Germany, generally, it appears to be a common saying that the wolf sits in the last sheaf. In some places, they call out to the reaper, "Beware of the wolf," or they say, "He is chasing the wolf out of the corn." In Mecklenburg, the last bunch of standing corn is itself commonly called the wolf, and the man who reaps it has the wolf, the animal being described as the rye wolf or the wheat wolf, the barley wolf, and so on, according to the particular crop. The reaper of the last corn is himself called wolf or rye wolf. If the crop is rye, and in many parts of Mecklenburg, he has to support the character by pretending to bite the other harvesters or by howling like a wolf. The last sheaf of corn is also called the wolf or the rye wolf or the oats wolf, according to the crop, and the woman who binds it, they say, "The wolf is biting her. She has the wolf. She must fetch the wolf," out of the corn. Moreover, she herself is called wolf. They cry out to her, "Thou art the wolf," and she has to bear the name for a whole year. Sometimes, according to the crop, she is called the rye wolf or the potato wolf. In the island of Rügen, not only is the woman who binds the last sheaf called wolf, but when she comes home, she bites the lady of the house and the stewardess, for which she receives a large piece of meat. Yet nobody likes to be the wolf. The same woman may be rye wolf, wheat wolf, and oats wolf, if she happens to bind the last sheaf of rye, wheat, and oats. At Bough, in the district of Cologne, it was formerly the custom to give the last sheaf the shape of a wolf. It was kept in the barn till the corn was threshed. Then it was brought to the farmer, and he had to sprinkle it with beer or brandy. At Brumschapten in Mecklenburg, the young woman who bound the last sheaf of wheat used to take a handful of stalks out of it and make the wheat wolf with them. It was the figure of a wolf about 2 feet long and half a foot high, the legs of the animal being represented by stiff stalks, and its tail and mane by wheat ears. This wheat wolf was carried back at the head of the harvesters to the village, where it was set up on a high place in the parlor of the farm and remained there for a long time. In many places the sheaf, called the wolf, is made up in human form and dressed in clothes. This indicates a confusion of ideas between the corn spirit, conceived in human and in animal form. Generally, the wolf is brought home on the last wagon with joyful cries. Hence, the last wagon load itself receives the name of the wolf. Again, the wolf is supposed to hide himself amongst the cut corn in the granary until he is driven out of the last bundle by the strokes of the flail. Hence, at Wansleben, near Magdeburg, after the threshing, the peasants go in procession, leading by a chain a man who is enveloped in the threshed-out straw and is called the wolf. He represents the corn spirit, who has been caught escaping from the threshed corn. In the district of Treves, it is believed that the corn wolf is killed at threshing. The men thresh the last sheaf till it is reduced to chopped straw. In this way, they think that the corn wolf, who was lurking in the last sheaf, has been certainly killed. In France, also, the corn wolf appears at harvest. Thus they call out the reaper of the last corn, "You will catch the wolf." Near Chambéry, they form a ring round the last standing corn and cry, "The wolf is in here." In Finistère, when the reaping draws near an end, the harvesters cry, "There is a wolf, we will catch him." Each takes a swath to reap, and he who finishes first calls out, "I've caught the wolf." In Guyenne, when the last corn has been reaped, they lead a wether all around the field. It is called the wolf of the field. Its horns are decked with a wreath of flowers and corn ears, and its neck and body are also encircled with garlands and ribbons. All the reapers march, singing behind it. Then it is killed on the field. In this part of France, the last sheaf is called the cueillage, which in the patois means a wether. Hence, the killing of the wether represents the death of the corn spirit, considered as present in the last sheaf. But two different conceptions of corn spirit, as wolf and as wether, are mixed up together. Sometimes it appears to be thought that the wolf, caught in the last corn, lives during the winter in the farmhouse, ready to renew his activity as corn spirit in the spring. Hence, at midwinter, when the lengthening days begin to herald the approach of spring, the wolf makes his appearance once more. In Poland, a man with a wolf's skin thrown over his head is led about at Christmas, or a stuffed wolf is carried about by persons who collect money. There are facts which point to an old custom of leading about a man enveloped in leaves and called the wolf, while his conductors collected money. Subsection 3. The corn spirit as a cock. Another form which the corn spirit often assumes is that of a cock. In Austria, children are warned against straying in the cornfield because the corn cock sits there and will peck their eyes out. In North Germany, they say that the cock sits in the last sheaf, and at cutting the last corn, the reapers cry, "Now we will chase out the cock." When it is cut, they say, "We have caught the cock." At Brawler in Transylvania, when the reapers come to the last patch of corn, they cry, "Here we shall catch the cock." At Furstenwald, when the last sheaf is about to be bound, the master releases a cock, which he has brought in a basket, and lets it run over the field. All the harvesters chase it till they catch it. Elsewhere, the harvesters all try to seize the last corn cut. He who succeeds in grasping it must crow, and is called cock. Among the Wends it is, or used to be, customary for the farmer to hide a live cock under the last sheaf, as it lay on the field, and when the corn was being gathered up, the harvester who lighted upon this sheaf had a right to keep the cock, provided he could catch it. This formed the close of the harvest festival, and was known as the cock-catching. And the beer which was served out to the reapers at this time went by the name of cock beer. The last sheaf is called cock, cocksheaf, harvest cock, harvest hen, autumn hen. A distinction is made between wheat cock, bean cock, and so on, according to the crop. At Wunschensel, in Thuringen, the last sheaf is made into the shape of a cock, and called the harvest cock. A figure of a cock, made of wood, pasteboard, ears of corn or flowers, is borne in front of the harvest wagon, especially in Westphalia, where the cock carries in his beak fruits of the earth of all kinds. Sometimes the image of the cock is fastened to the top of a May tree on the last harvest wagon. Elsewhere, a live cock, or a figure of one, is attached to the harvest crown and carried on a pole. In Galicia and elsewhere, this live cock is fastened to the garland of corn ears or flowers, which the leader of women reapers carries on her head as she marches in front of the harvest procession. In Silesia, a live cock is presented to the master on a plate. The harvest supper is called harvest cock, stubble cock, etc., and a chief dish at it, at least in some places, is a cock. If a wagoner upsets a harvest wagon, it is said that he has split the harvest cock, and he loses the cock that is the harvest supper. The harvest wagon, with the figure of the cock on it, is driven around the farmhouse before it is taken to the barn. Then the cock is nailed over or at the side of the house door, or on the gable, and remains there till next harvest. In East Friesland, the person who gives the last stroke at threshing is called the clucking hen, and grain is strewed before him as if he were a hen. Again, the corn spirit is killed in the form of a cock. In parts of Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Picardy, the reapers place a live cock in the corn, which is to be cut last, and chase it over the field, or bury it up to the neck in the ground. Afterwards, they strike off its head with a sickle or scythe. In many parts of Westphalia, when the harvesters bring the wooden cock to the farmer, he gives them a live cock, which they kill with whips or sticks, or behead with an old sword, or throw into the barn to the girls, or give to the mistress to cook. If the harvest cock has not been split, that is, if no wagon has been upset, the harvesters have the right to kill the farmyard cock by throwing stones at it or beheading it. Where this custom has fallen into disuse, it is still common for the farmer's wife to make cocky leeky for harvesters, and to show them the head of the cock which has been killed for the soup. In the neighborhood of Klausenburg, Transylvania, a cock is buried in the harvest field in the earth, so that only its head appears. A young man then takes his scythe and cuts off the cock's head at a single sweep. If he fails to do this, he is called the red cock for a whole year, and people fear that next year's crop will be bad. Near Udvarhely in Transylvania, a live cock is bound up in the last sheaf and killed with a spit. It is then skinned. The flesh is thrown away, but the skin and feathers are kept till next year, and in spring the grain from the last sheaf is mixed with the feathers of the cock and scattered on the field which is to be tilled. Nothing could set in a clear light the identification of the cock and the spirit of the corn. By being tied up in the last sheaf and killed, the cock is identified with the corn, and its death with the cutting of the corn. By keeping its feathers till spring, then mixing them with the seed corn taken from the very sheaf in which the bird had been bound, and scattering the feathers together with the seed over the field, the identity of the bird with the corn is again emphasized, and its quickening and fertilizing power, as an embodiment of the corn spirit, is intimated in the plainest manner. Thus, the corn spirit, in the form of a cock, is killed at harvest, but rises to fresh life and activity in spring. Again, the equivalence of the cock to the corn is expressed, hardly less plainly, in the custom of burying the bird in the ground and cutting off its head, like the ears of corn, with the scythe. Subsection 4. The corn spirit as a hare. Another common embodiment of the corn spirit is the hare. In Galloway, the reaping of the last standing corn is called cutting the hare. The mode of cutting it is as follows. When the rest of the corn has been reaped, a handful is left standing to form the hare. It is divided into 3 parts and plaited, and the ears are tied in a knot. The reapers then retire a few yards, and each throws his or her sickle in turn at the hare to cut it down. It must be cut below the knot, and the reapers continue to throw their sickles at it, one after the other, until one of them succeeds in severing the stalks below the knot. The hare is then carried home and given to a maidservant in the kitchen, who places it over the kitchen door on the inside. Sometimes the hare used to be thus kept till the next harvest. In the parish of Middagaff, when the hare was cut, the unmarried reapers ran home with all speed, and the one who arrived first was the first to be married. In Germany, also, one of the names for the last sheaf is the hare. Thus, in some parts of Anhalt, when the corn has been reaped and only a few stalks are left standing, they say, "The hare will come soon," or the reapers cry to each other, "Look how the hare comes jumping out." In East Prussia, they say that the hare sits in the last patch of standing corn, and must be chased out by the last reaper. The reapers hurry with their work, each being anxious not to have to chase out the hare, for the man who does so, that is, who cuts the last corn, is much laughed at. At Aurich, as we have seen, an expression for cutting the last corn is to cut off the hare's tail. He is killing the hare, is commonly said of the man who cuts the last corn in Germany, Sweden, Holland, France, and Italy. In Norway, the man is thus said to kill the hare, must give hare's blood, in the form of brandy, to his fellows to drink. In Lesbos, when the reapers are at work in 2 neighboring fields, each party tries to finish first in order to drive the hare into the neighbor's field. The reapers who succeed in doing so believe the next year the crop will be better. A small sheaf of corn is made up and kept beside the holy picture till next harvest. Subsection 5. The corn spirit as a cat. Again, the corn spirit sometimes takes the form of a cat. Near Kiel, children are warned not to go into the cornfields because the cat sits there. in Eisenach, Oberland, they are told, the corn cat will come and fetch you. The corn cat goes in the corn. In some parts of Silesia, at mowing, the last corn, they say, the cat is caught. And at threshing, the man who gives the last stroke is called the cat. In the neighborhood of Lyons, the last sheaf and the harvest supper are both called the cat. About Vesoul, when they cut the last corn, they say, we have the cat by the tail. At Briançon in Dauphiné, at the beginning of reaping, a cat is decked out with ribbons, flowers, and ears of corn. It is called the cat of the ball skin, les chats de peau de ball. If a reaper is wounded at his work, they make the cat lick the wound. At the close of the reaping, the cat is again decked out with ribbons and ears of corn. Then they dance and make merry. When the dance is over, the girls solemnly strip the cat of its finery. At Grüneberg in Silesia, the reaper who cuts the last corn goes by the name of the tomcat. He is enveloped in rye stalks and green withes, and is furnished with a long plaited tail. Sometimes as a companion he has a man similarly dressed, who is called the female cat. Their duty is to run after people whom they see and to beat them with a long stick. Near Amiens, the expression for finishing the harvest is, they are going to kill the cat, and when the last corn is cut, they kill a cat in the farmyard. At threshing in some parts of France, a live cat is placed under the last bundle of corn to be threshed, and is struck dead with the flails. Then on Sunday it is roasted and eaten as a holiday dish. In the Vosges Mountains, the close of haymaking or harvest is called catching the cat, killing the dog, or more rarely, catching the hare. The cat, the dog, or the hare is said to be fat or lean, according as the crop is good or bad. The man who cuts the last handful of hay or of wheat is said to catch the cat or the hare, or to kill the dog. Subsection 6. The corn spirit as a goat. Further, the corn spirit often appears in the form of a goat. In some parts of Prussia, when the corn bends before the wind, they say, the goats are chasing each other. The wind is driving the goats through the corn. The goats are browsing there, and they expect a very good harvest. Again, they say, the oats goat is sitting in the oats field. The corn goat is sitting in the rye field. Children are warned not to go into the cornfields to pluck the blue cornflowers, or amongst the beans to pluck pods, because the rye goat, the corn goat, the oats goat, or the bean goat is sitting or lying there, and will carry them away or kill them. When a harvester is taken sick, or lags behind his fellows at their work, they call out, the harvest goat has pushed him. He has been pushed by the corn goat. In the neighborhood of Braunsberg, East Prussia, at binding the oats every harvester makes haste, lest the corn goat push him. At Ofoten, in Norway, each reaper has his allotted patch to reap. When a reaper in the middle has not finished reaping his piece after his neighbors have finished theirs, they say to him, he remains on the island, and if the laggard is a man, they imitate the cry with which they call a he-goat. If a woman, the cry with which they call a she-goat. Near Strobing, in Lower Bavaria, it is said of the man who cuts the last corn that he has the corn goat, or the wheat goat, or the oats goat, according to the crop. Moreover, 2 horns are set up on the last heap of corn, and it is called the horned goat. At Kreuzberg, East Prussia, they call out to the woman who is binding the last sheaf, the goat is sitting in the sheaf. At Gablingen in Swabia, when the last field of oats upon a farm is being reaped, the reapers carve a goat out of wood. Ears of oats are inserted in its nostrils and mouth, and it is adorned with garlands of flowers. It is set up on the field and called the oats goat. When the reaping approaches an end, the reaper hastens to finish the piece first. He who is the last to finish gets the oats goat. Again, the last sheaf is itself called the goat. Thus, in the valley of the Weisent Bavaria, the last sheaf bound on the field is called the goat, and they have a proverb, the field must bear a goat. At Spalkenbrücken in Hesse, the last handful of corn which is cut is called the goat, and the man who cuts it is much ridiculed. At Durenbuching and about Mosbach in Baden, the last sheaf is also called the goat. Sometimes the last sheaf is made up in the form of a goat, and they say, the goat is sitting in it. Again, the person who cuts or binds the last sheaf is called the goat. Thus, in parts of Mecklenburg, they call out to the woman who binds the last sheaf, you are the harvest goat. Near Uelzen in Hanover, the harvest festival begins with the bringing of the harvest goat. That is, the woman who bound the last sheaf is wrapped in straw, crowned with a harvest wreath, and brought in a wheelbarrow to the village, where a round dance takes place. About Lüneburg, also, the woman who binds the last corn is decked with a crown of corn ears and is called the corn goat. At Monsensheim in Baden, the reaper who cuts the last handful of corn or oats is called the corn goat or the oats goat. In the canton St. Gall, Switzerland, the person who cuts the last handful of corn on the field or drives the last harvest wagon to the barn is called the corn goat or the rye goat or simply the goat. In the canton Thurgau, he is called corn goat. Like a goat, he has a bell hung round his neck, is led in triumph and drenched with liquor. In parts of Styria also, the man who cuts the last corn is called corn goat, oats goat, or the like. As a rule, the man who thus gets the name of corn goat has to bear it a whole year till the next harvest. According to one view, the corn spirit, who has been caught in the form of a goat or otherwise, lives in the farmhouse or barn over winter. Thus, each farm has its own embodiment of the corn spirit. But according to another view, the corn spirit is the genius or deity, not of the corn of one farm only, but of all the corn. Hence, when the corn on one farm is all cut, he flees to another where there is still corn left standing. This idea is brought out in a harvest custom which was formerly observed in Skye. The farmer who first finished reaping sent a man or woman with a sheaf to a neighboring farmer who had not finished. The latter, in his turn, when he had finished, sent on the sheaf to his neighbor who was still reaping. And so the sheaf made the round of the farms till all the corn was cut. The sheaf was called the Goaber Baka. This is the cripple goat. The custom appears not to be extinct at the present day, for it was reported from Skye not very many years ago. The corn spirit was probably thus represented as lame, because he had been crippled by the cutting of the corn. Sometimes the old woman who brings home the last sheaf must limp on one foot, but sometimes the corn spirit, in the form of a goat, is believed to be slain on the harvest field by the sickle or scythe. Thus, in the neighborhood of Bernkastel, on the Moselle, the reapers determine by lot the order in which they shall follow each other. The first is called the fore-reaper, the last the tail-reaper. If a reaper overtakes the man in front, he reaps past him, bending round so as to leave the slower reaper in a patch by himself. This patch is called the goat, and the man for whom the goat is cut in this way is laughed and jeered at by his fellows for the rest of the day. When the talebearer cuts the last ears of corn, it is said he is cutting the goat's neck off. In the neighborhood of Grenoble, before the end of the reaping, a live goat is adorned with flowers and ribbons, and allowed to run about the field. The reapers chase it and try to catch it. When it is caught, the farmer's wife holds it fast, while the farmer cuts off its head. The goat's flesh serves to furnish the harvest supper. A piece of the flesh is pickled and kept till the next harvest, when another goat is killed, when all the harvesters eat of the flesh. On the same day, the skin of the goat is made into a cloak, which the farmer who works with his men must always wear at harvest time, if rain or bad weather sets in. But if a reaper gets pains in his back, the farmer gives him the goat skin to wear. The reason for this seems to be that the pains in the back, being inflicted by the corn spirit, can also be healed by it. Similarly, we saw that elsewhere, when a reaper is wounded at reaping, a cat, as the representative of the corn spirit, is made to lick the wound. Estonian reapers of the island of Man think that the man who cuts the first ears of corn at harvest will get pains in his back, probably because the corn spirit is believed to represent especially the first wound, and in order to escape pains in the back, Saxon reapers in Transylvania gird their loins with the first handful of ears which they cut. Here again the corn spirit is applied to for healing or protection, but in his original vegetable form, not in the form of a goat or a cat. Further, the corn spirit, under the form of a goat, is sometimes conceived as lurking among the cut corn in the barn, till he is driven from it by the threshing flail. Thus, in Baden, the last sheaf to be threshed is called the corn goat, the spelt goat, or the oats goat, according to the kind of grain. Again, near Marktel, in Upper Bavaria, the sheaves are called straw goats, or simply goats. They are laid in a great heap on the open field and threshed by 2 rows of men standing opposite each other, who, as they ply their flails, sing a song in which they say that they see the straw goat amongst the cornstalks. The last goat, that is, the last sheaf, is adorned with a wreath of violets and other flowers, and with cakes strung together. It is placed right in the middle of the heap, Some of the threshers rush at it and tear the best of it out. Others lay on with their flails so recklessly that heads are sometimes broken. At Oberental in the Tyrol, the last thresher is called Goat. So at Hasselberg in West Bohemia, the man who gives the last stroke at threshing oats is called the Oats Goat. At Tettenang in Württemberg, the thresher who gives the last stroke to the last bundle of corn before it is turned goes by the name of the he-goat, and it is said he has driven the he-goat away. The person who, after the bundle has been turned, gives the last stroke of all is called the she-goat. In this custom, it is implied that the corn is inhabited by a pair of corn spirits, male and female. Further, the corn spirit captured in the form of a goat at threshing is passed on to a neighbor whose threshing is not yet finished. In Franche-Comté, as soon as the threshing is over, the young people set up a straw figure of a goat on the farmyard of a neighbor who is still threshing. He must give them wine or money in return. At Ellwangen in Württemberg, the effigy of a goat is made out of the last bundle of corn at threshing. 4 sticks form its legs and 2 its horns. The man who gives the last stroke with the flail must carry the goat to the barn of a neighbor who is still threshing and throw it down on the floor. If he is caught in the act, they tie the goat on his back. A similar custom is observed in Indersdorf in Upper Bavaria. The man who throws the straw goat into the neighbor's barn imitates the bleating of a goat. If they catch him, they blacken his face and tie the goat on his back. At Saverne in Alsace, when a farmer is a week or more behind his neighbors with his threshing, they set a real stuffed goat or fox before his door. Sometimes the spirit of the corn, in goat form, is believed to be killed at threshing. In the district of Traunstein, Upper Bavaria, they think that the oats goat is in the last sheaf of oats. He is represented by an old rake set up on end with an old pot for a head. The children are then told to kill the oats goat. Subsection 7. The corn spirit as a bull, cow, or ox. Another form which the corn spirit often assumes is that of a bull, cow, or ox. When the wind sweeps over the corn, they say at Konitz in West Prussia, the steer is running in the corn. When the corn is thick and strong in one spot, they say in some parts of East Prussia, the bull is lying on the corn. When a harvester has overstrained and lamed himself, they say in the Graudens district of West Prussia, the bull pushed him. In Lorraine, they say, he has the bull. The meaning of both expressions is that he has unwittingly lighted upon the divine corn spirit, who has punished the profane intruder with lameness. So near Chambéry, when a reaper wounds himself with his sickle, it is said that he has the wound of the ox. In the district of Bunzlau, Silesia, the last sheaf is sometimes made into the shape of a horned ox, stuffed with tow and wrapped in corn ears. This figure is called the Old Man. In some parts of Bohemia, the last sheaf is made up in human form and called the Buffalo Bull. These cases show a confusion of the human with the animal shape of the corn spirit. The confusion is like that of killing a wether, under the name of a wolf. All over Swabia, the last bundle of corn on the field is called the cow. The man who cuts the last ears has the cow, and is himself called cow, or barley cow, or oats cow, according to the crop. At the harvest supper, he gets a nosegay of flowers and corn ears, and a more liberal allowance of drink than the rest. But he is teased and laughed at, so no one likes to be the cow. The cow was sometimes represented by the figure of a woman made out of ears of corn and cornflowers. It was carried to the farmhouse by the man who had cut the last handful of corn. The children ran after him, and the neighbors turned out to laugh at him, till the farmer took the cow from him. Here again, the confusion between the human and the animal form of the corn spirit is apparent. In various parts of Switzerland, the reaper who cuts the last ears of corn is called wheat cow, corn cow, oats cow, or corn steer, and is the butt of many a joke. On the other hand, in the district of Rosenheim, Upper Bavaria, when a farmer is later of getting in his harvest than his neighbors, they set up on his land a straw bull, as it is called. This is a gigantic figure of a bull made of stubble on a framework of wood and adorned with flowers and leaves. Attached to it is a label on which are scrawled doggerel verses and ridicule of the man whose land the straw bull is set up. Again, the corn spirit, in the form of a bull or ox, is killed on the harvest field at the close of the reaping. At Pouilly near Dijon, when the last ears of corn are about to be cut, an ox adorned with ribbons, flowers, and ears of corn is led all around the field, followed by the whole troop of reapers dancing. Then a man disguised as the devil cuts the last ears of corn and immediately slaughters the ox. Part of the flesh of the animal is eaten at the harvest supper, part is pickled and kept till the first day of sowing in spring. At Pont-à-Mousson and elsewhere on the evening of the last day of reaping, a calf adorned with flowers and ears of corn is led thrice round the farmyard, being allured by a bait or driven by men with sticks, or conducted by the farmer's wife with a rope. The calf chosen for this ceremony is the calf which was first born on the farm in the spring of the year. It is followed by all the reapers with their tools. Then it is allowed to run free. The reapers chase it, and whoever catches it is called king of the calf. Lastly, it is solemnly killed. At Lunéville, the man who acts as butcher is the Jewish merchant of the village. Sometimes again, the corn spirit hides himself amongst the cut corn in the barn to reappear in bull or cow form at threshing. Thus, at Wormlingen in Thuringen, the man who gives the last stroke at threshing is called the cow, or rather the barley cow, oats cow, peas cow, or the like according to the crop. He is entirely enveloped in straw. His head is surmounted by sticks in imitation of horns, and two lads lead him by ropes to the well to drink. On the way thither, he must low like a cow, and for a long time afterwards, he goes by the name of the cow. At Obermedlingen in Swabia, when the threshing draws near an end, each man is careful to avoid giving the last stroke. He who does give it gets the cow, which is a straw figure dressed in an old ragged petticoat, hood, and stockings. It is tied on his back with a straw rope. His face is blackened, and being bound with straw ropes to a wheelbarrow, he is wheeled round the village. Here again we meet with confusion between the human and animal shape of the corn spirit, which we have noted in other customs. In Canton, Schaffhausen, the man who threshes the last corn is called the cow. In Canton, Thurgau, the corn bull. In Canton, Zurich, the thresher cow. In the last mentioned district, he is wrapped in straw and bound to one of the trees in the orchard. At Arad in Hungary, the man who gives the last stroke at threshing is enveloped in straw and cow's hide, with the horns attached to it. At Pesnitz, in the district of Dresden, the man who gives the last stroke with the flail is called bull. He must make a strawman and set it up before a neighbor's window. Here, apparently, as in so many cases, the corn spirit is passed on to a neighbor who has not finished threshing. So at Herbrechtingen and Thuringen, the effigy of a ragged old woman is flung into the barn of the farmer who is last with his threshing. The man who throws it in cries, "There is the cow for you." If the threshers catch him, they detain him overnight and punish him by keeping him from the harvest supper. In these latter customs, the confusion between the human and the animal shape of the corn spirit meets us again. Further, the corn spirit, in bull form, is sometimes believed to be killed at threshing. At Auxerre, in threshing the last bundle of corn, they call out 12 times, "We are killing the bull." In the neighborhood of Bordeaux, where a butcher kills an ox on the field immediately after the close of the reaping, it is said of the man who gives the last stroke at threshing that he has killed the bull. At Chambéry, the last sheaf is called the sheaf of the young ox, and a race takes place to it in which all the reapers join. When the last stroke is given at threshing, they say that the ox is killed, and immediately thereupon a real ox is slaughtered by the reaper who cut the last corn. The flesh of the ox is eaten by the threshers at supper. We have seen that sometimes the young corn spirit, whose task it is to quicken the corn of the coming year, is believed to be born as a corn baby on the harvest field. Similarly, in Berry, the young corn spirit is sometimes supposed to be born on the field in calf form. For when a binder has not rope enough to bind all the corn in sheaves, he puts aside the wheat that remains over and imitates the lowing of a cow. The meaning is that the sheaf has given birth to a calf. In Puy de Dôme, when a binder cannot keep up with the reaper whom he or she follows, they say he or she is giving birth to the calf. In some parts of Prussia, In similar circumstances, they call out to the woman, "The bull is coming," and imitate the bellowing of a bull. In these cases, the woman is conceived as the corn cow or old corn spirit, while the supposed calf is the corn calf or young corn spirit. In some parts of Austria, a mythical calf, Mukalken, is believed to be seen amongst the sprouting corn in spring, and to push the children. When the corn waves in the wind, they say, the calf is going about. Clearly, as Mannhardt observes, this calf of the springtime is the same animal which is afterwards believed to be killed at reaping. Subsection 8. The corn spirit as a horse or mare. Sometimes the corn spirit appears in the shape of a horse or mare. Between Kahl and Stuttgart, when the corn bends before the wind, they say, "There runs the horse." At Bollingen, near Radolfzell, in Baden, the last sheaf of oats is called the oat stallion. In Hertfordshire, at the end of the reaping, there is or used to be observed a ceremony called crying the mare. The last blades of corn left standing in the field are tied together and called the mare. The reapers stand at a distance and throw their sickles at it. He who cuts it through has the prize with acclamations and good cheer. After it is cut, the reapers cry thrice with a loud voice, "I have her." Others answer thrice, "What have you?" "A mare, a mare, a mare." "Whose is she?" is next asked thrice. "A B's," naming the owner thrice. "Whither will you send her?" "To CD," naming some neighbor who has not reaped all his corn. In this custom, the corn spirit, in the form of a mare, is passed on from a farm where the corn is all cut to another farm where it is still standing, and where therefore the corn spirit may be supposed naturally to take refuge. In Shropshire the custom is similar. The farmer who finishes his harvest last, and who therefore cannot send the mare to anyone else, is said to keep her all winter. The mocking offer of the mare to a laggard neighbor, who was sometimes responded to by a mocking acceptance of her help. Thus an old man told an inquirer, "While we went at supper, a mon come with an udder to fetch her away." In one place a real mare used to be sent, but the man who rode her was subjected to some rough treatment at the farmhouse to which he paid his unwelcome visit. In the neighborhood of Lisle, the idea of the corn spirit in horse form is clearly preserved. When a harvester grows weary at his work, it is said he has the fatigue of the horse. The first sheaf, called the cross of the horse, is placed on a cross of boxwood in the barn, and the youngest horse on the farm must tread on it. The reapers dance round the last blades of corn, crying, "See the remains of the horse." The sheaf made out of these last blades is given to the youngest horse of the parish commune to eat. The youngest horse of the parish clearly represents, as Mannhardt says, the corn spirit of the following year, the corn foal, which absorbs the spirit of the old corn horse by eating the last corn cut, for as usual the old corn spirit takes his final refuge in the last sheaf. The thresher of the last sheaf is said to beat the horse. Subsection 9. The corn spirit as a pig, boar, or sow. The last animal embodiment of the corn spirit which we shall notice is the pig, boar, or sow. In Thuringen, when the wind sets the young corn in motion, they sometimes say, "The boar is rushing through the corn." Amongst the Estonians of the island of Oesel, the last sheaf is called the rye boar, and the man who gets it is saluted with a cry of, "You have the rye boar on your back." In reply, he strikes up a song in which he prays for plenty. At Kollerwinkel, near Augsburg, at the close of the harvest, the last bunch of standing corn is cut down stalk by all the reapers in turn. He who cuts the last stalk gets the sow, and is laughed at. In other Swabian villages, also, the man who cuts the last corn has the sow, or has the rye sow. At Bollingen, near Radolfzell, in Baden, the last sheaf is called the rye sow or the wheat sow, according to the crop, and Rohrenbach, in Baden, the person who brings the last armful for the last sheaf is called the corn sow or the oat sow. At Friedingen, in Swabia, the thresher who gives the last stroke is called sow, barley sow, corn sow, or the like, according to the crop. At Ansmettingen, the man who gives the last stroke at threshing has the sow. He is often bound up in a sheaf and dragged by a rope along the road. and generally in Swabia, the man who gives the last stroke with the flail is called sow. He may, however, rid himself of this invidious distinction by passing on to a neighbor the straw rope, which is the badge of his position as sow. So he goes to a house and throws the straw rope into it, crying, "There, I bring you the sow." All the inmates give chase, and if they catch him, they beat him, shut him up for several hours in the pigsty, and oblige him to take the sow away again. In various parts of Upper Bavaria, the man who gives the last stroke at threshing must carry the pig, that is, either a straw effigy of a pig, or merely a bundle of straw ropes. This he carries to a neighboring farm, where the threshing is not finished, and throws it into the barn. If the threshers catch him, they handle him roughly, beating him, blackening or dirtying his face, throwing him into filth, binding the sow on his back, and so on. If the bearer of the sow is a woman, they cut off her hair. At the harvest supper or dinner, the man who carried the pig gets one or more dumplings made in the form of pigs. When the dumplings are served up by the maidservant, all the people at the table cry, "Suze, Suze, Suze," that being the cry used in calling pigs. Sometimes, after dinner, the man who carried the pig has his face blackened and is set on a cart and drawn round the village by his fellows, following by a crowd crying, "Suze, Suze, Suze," as if they were calling swine. Sometimes, after being wheeled round the village, he is flung on the dunghill. Again, the corn spirit, in the form of a pig, plays his part at sowing time as well as at harvest. At Nieuwouts in Courland, when barley is sown for the first time in the year, the farmer's wife boils the chine of a pig along with the tail and brings it to the sower in the field. He eats of it, but cuts off the tail and sticks it in the field. It is believed that the ears of the corn will then grow as long as the tail. Here the pig is the corn spirit, whose fertilizing power is sometimes supposed to lie especially in his tail. As a pig he is put in the ground at sowing time, and as a pig he reappears amongst the ripe corn at harvest. For amongst the neighboring Estonians, as we have seen, the last sheaf is called the rye boar. Somewhat similar customs are observed in Germany. In the Salza district, near Meiningen, a certain bone in the pig is called the Jew on the winnowing fan. The flesh of this bone is boiled on Shrove Tuesday, but the bone is put amongst the ashes, which the neighbors exchange as presents on St. Peter's Day, the 22nd of February, and then mixed with the seed corn. In the whole of Hesse, Meiningen, and other districts, people eat pea soup with dried pig ribs on Ash Wednesday or Candlemas. The ribs are then collected and hung in the room till sowing time, when they are inserted in the sown field or in the seed bag amongst the flax seed. This is thought to be an infallible specific against earth fleas and moles, and to cause the flax to grow well and tall. But the idea of the corn spirit, as embodied in pig form, is nowhere more clearly expressed than in the Scandinavian custom of the Yule boar. In Sweden and Denmark, at Yule, Christmas, it is the custom to bake a loaf in the form of a boar pig. This is called the Yule boar. The corn of the last sheaf is often used to make it. All through Yule, the Yule boar stands on the table. Often it is kept till the sowing time in spring, when part of it is mixed with the seed corn, and part given to the plowmen and plow horses or plow oxen to eat, in the expectation of a good harvest. In this custom, the corn spirit, imminent in the last sheaf, appears at midwinter in the form of a boar, made from the corn of the last sheaf, and his quickening influence on the corn is shown by mixing part of the Yule boar with the seed corn, and giving part of it to the plowman and his cattle to eat. Similarly, we saw that the corn wolf makes his appearance at midwinter, the time when the year begins to verge towards spring. Formerly, a real boar was sacrificed at Christmas, and apparently also a man in the character of the Yule boar. This, at least, may perhaps be inferred from a Christmas custom still observed in Sweden. A man is wrapped up in a skin and carries a wisp of straw in his mouth, so that the protecting straw looks like the bristles of a boar. A knife is brought, and an old woman with her face blackened pretends to sacrifice him. On Christmas Eve, in some parts of the Estonian island of Oisel, they bake a long cake with the two ends turned up. It is called the Christmas boar, and stands on the table till the morning of New Year's Day, when it is distributed among the cattle. In other parts of the island, the Christmas boar is not a cake, but a little pig born in March, which the housewife fattens secretly, often without the knowledge of the other members of the family. On Christmas Eve, the little pig is secretly killed, then roasted in the oven and set on the table, standing on all fours, where it remains in this posture for several days. In other parts of the island again, though the Christmas cake has neither the name nor the shape of a boar, it is kept till the new year, when half of it is divided among all the members of all the quadrupeds of the family. The other half of the cake is kept till sowing time comes round, when it is similarly distributed in the morning among human beings and beasts. In other parts of Estonia, again, the Christmas boar, as it is called, is baked of the first rye cut at harvest. It has a conical shape, and a cross is impressed on it with a pig's bone, or a key, or 3 dints are made in it with a buckle, or a piece of charcoal. It stands with a light beside it, on the table, all through the festal season. On New Year's Day and Epiphany, before sunrise, a little of the cake is crumbled with salt and given to the cattle. The rest is kept till the day when the cattle are driven out to pasture for the first time in spring. It is then put in the herdsman's bag, and at evening is divided among the cattle to guard them from magic and harm. In some places, the Christmas boar is partaken of by farm servants and cattle at the time of the barley sowing, for the purpose of thereby producing a heavier crop. Subsection 10. On the animal embodiments of the corn spirit. So much for the animal embodiments of the corn spirit as they are presented to us in the folk customs of Northern Europe. These customs bring out clearly the sacramental character of the harvest supper. The corn spirit is conceived as embodied in an animal. This divine animal is slain, and its flesh and blood are partaken of by the harvesters. Thus the cock, the hare, the cat, the goat, and the ox are eaten sacramentally by the harvester, and the pig is eaten sacramentally by plowmen in spring. Again, as a substitute for the real flesh of the divine being, bread or dumplings are made in his image and eaten sacramentally. Thus, pig-shaped dumplings are eaten by the harvesters, and loaves made in boar shape, the Yule boar, are eaten in spring by the plowman and his cattle. The reader has probably remarked the complete parallelism between the conceptions of the corn spirit in human and in animal form. The parallel may be here briefly resumed. When the corn waves in the wind, it is said either that the corn mother or that the corn wolf, etc., is passing through the corn. Children are warned against straying in cornfields, either because the corn mother or because the corn wolf, etc., is there. In the last corn cut or the last sheaf threshed, either the corn mother or the corn wolf, etc., is supposed to be present. The last sheaf is itself called either corn mother or corn wolf, etc., and is made up in the shape either of a woman or of a wolf, etc. The person who cuts, binds, or threshes the last sheaf is called either the old woman or the wolf, etc., according to the name bestowed on the sheaf itself. As in some places, a sheaf made in human form and called the maiden, the mother of the maize, etc., is kept from one harvest to the next, in order to secure a continuance of the corn spirit's blessing. So in some places the harvest cock, and in others the flesh of the goat, is kept for a similar purpose from one harvest to the next. As in some places the grain taken from the corn mother is mixed with the seed corn in spring to make the crop abundant, so in some places the feathers of the cock, and in Sweden the Yule boar, are kept till spring and mixed with the seed corn for a like purpose. As part of the corn mother or maiden is given to the cattle at Christmas or to the horses at the first plowing, so part of the Yule boar is given to the plowing horses or oxen in spring. Lastly, the death of the corn spirit is represented by killing or pretending to kill either his human or his animal representative, and the worshippers partake sacramentally either of the actual body and blood of the representative of the divinity or of bread made in his likeness. Other animal forms assumed by the corn spirit are the fox, stag, roe, sheep, bear, ass, mouse, quail, stork, swan, and kite. If it is asked why the corn spirit should be thought to appear in the form of an animal, and of so many different animals, we may reply that to primitive man, the simple appearance of an animal or bird among the corn is probably enough to suggest a mysterious link between the creature and the corn. And when we remember that in the old days, before fields were fenced in, all kinds of animals must have been free to roam over them, we need not wonder that the corn spirit should have been identified even with large animals like the horse and cow, which nowadays could not, except by a rare accident, be found staying in an English cornfield. This explanation applies with peculiar force to the very common case in which the animal embodiment of the corn spirit is believed to lurk in the last standing corn. For at harvest, a number of wild animals, such as hares, rabbits, and partridges, are commonly driven by the progress of the reaping into the last patch of standing corn, and make their escape from it as it is being cut down. So regularly does this happen that reapers and others often stand round the last patch of corn, armed with sticks or guns, with which they kill the animals as they dart out of their last refuge among the stalks. Now primitive man, to whom magical changes of shape seem perfectly credible, finds it almost natural that the spirit of the corn, driven from his home in the ripe grain, should make his escape in the form of the animal, which is seen to rush out of the last patch of corn as it falls under the scythe of the reaper. Thus, the identification of the corn spirit with an animal is analogous to the identification of him with a passing stranger, as the sudden appearance of a stranger near the harvest field or threshing floor is, to the primitive mind, enough to identify him as the spirit of the corn escaping from the cut or threshed corn. So the sudden appearance of an animal issuing from the cut corn is enough to identify it with the corn spirit escaping from his ruined home. The two identifications are so analogous that they can hardly be dissociated in any attempt to explain them. Those who look to some other principle than the one here suggested for the explanation of the latter identification are bound to show that their theory covers the former identification also. Chapter 49. Ancient Deities of Vegetation as Animals. Subsection 1. Dionysus, the Goat and the Bull. However we may explain it, the fact remains that in peasant folklore, the corn spirit is very commonly conceived and represented in animal form. May not this fact explain the relation in which certain animals stood to the ancient deities of vegetation, Dionysus, Demeter, Adonis, Attis, and Osiris? To begin with Dionysus, we have seen that he was represented sometimes as a goat and sometimes as a bull. As a goat, he can hardly be separated from the minor divinities, the Pans, Satyrs, and Silenuses, all of whom are closely associated with him and are represented more or less completely in the forms of goats. Thus, Pan was regularly portrayed in sculpture and painting with the face and legs of a goat. The satyrs were depicted with pointed goat ears, and sometimes with sprouting horns and short tails. They were sometimes spoken of simply as goats, and in the drama their parts were played by men dressed in goat skins. Silenus is represented in art clad in a goat skin. Further, the fauns, the Italian counterparts of the Greek Pans and Satyrs, are described as being half goats, with goat feet and goat horns. Again, all these minor goat-formed divinities partake more or less clearly of the character of woodland deities. Thus, Pan was called by the Arcadians the Lord of the Wood. The Silenuses kept company with the tree nymphs. The fauns are expressly designated as woodland deities, and their character as such is still further brought out by their association or even identification with Silvanus and the Silvanuses, who, as their name of itself indicates, are spirits of the woods. Lastly, the association of the satyrs with the Silenuses, fauns, and Silvanuses proves that the satyrs also were woodland deities. These goat-formed spirits of the woods have their counterparts in the folklore of northern Europe. Thus, the Russian wood spirit, called Legeshi, from lej, wood, are believed to appear partly in human shape, but with the horns, ears, and legs of goats. The Lechi can alter his stature at pleasure. When he walks in the wood, he is as tall as the trees. When he walks in the meadows, he is no higher than the grass. Some of the Lechi are spirits of the corn as well as of the wood. Before harvest, they are as tall as the cornstalks, but after it they shrink to the height of the stubble. This brings out, what we have remarked before, the close connection between tree spirits and corn spirits, and shows how easily the former may melt into the latter. Similarly, the fauns, though wood spirits, were believed to foster the growth of the crops. We have already seen how often the corn spirit is represented in folk custom as a goat. On the whole, then, as Banhart argues, the Pans, Satyrs, and fauns perhaps belong to a widely diffused class of wood spirits conceived in goat form. The fondness of goats for straying in woods and nibbling the bark of trees, to which indeed they are most destructive, is an obvious and perhaps sufficient reason why wood spirits should so often be supposed to take the form of goats. The inconsistency of a god of vegetation subsisting upon the vegetation which he personifies is not one to strike the primitive mind. Such inconsistencies arise when the deity, ceasing to be immanent in the vegetation, comes to be regarded as its owner or lord, for the idea of owning the vegetation naturally leads to that of subsisting on it. Sometimes the corn spirit, originally conceived as immanent in the corn, afterwards comes to be regarded as its owner, who lives on it and is reduced to poverty and want by being deprived of it. Hence, he is often known as the poor man or the poor woman. Occasionally, the last sheaf is left standing on the field, or the poor old woman, or the old rye woman. Thus, the representation of wood spirits in the form of goats appears to be both widespread and, to the primitive mind, natural. Therefore, when we find, as we have done, that Dionysus, a tree god, is sometimes represented in goat form, we can hardly avoid concluding that this representation is simply a part of his proper character as a tree god, and is not to be explained by the fusion of two distinct and independent worships, in one of which he originally appeared as a tree god, and in the other as a goat. Dionysus was also figured, as we have seen, in the shape of a bull. After what has gone before, we are naturally led to expect that his bull form must have been only another expression for his character as a deity of vegetation, especially as the bull is a common embodiment of the corn spirit in northern Europe, and the close association of Dionysus with Demeter and Persephone in the mysteries of Lucius shows that he had at least strong agricultural affinities. The probability of this view will be somewhat increased if it can be shown that in other rites than those of Dionysus, the ancients slew an ox as a representative of the spirit of vegetation. This they appear to have done in the Athenian sacrifice known as the murder of the ox, Bouphonia. It took place about the end of June or beginning of July, that is, about the time when the threshing is nearly over in Attica. According to tradition, the sacrifice was instituted to procure a cessation of drought and dearth, which had afflicted the land. The ritual was as follows. Barley mixed with wheat, or cakes made of them, were laid upon the bronze altar of Zeus Poleus on the Acropolis. Oxen were driven round the altar, and the ox, which went up to the altar and ate the offering on it, was sacrificed. The axe and knife with which the breast was slain had been previously wetted with water brought by maidens called water carriers. The weapons were then sharpened and handed to the butchers, one of whom felled the ox with the axe, and another cut its throat with the knife. As soon as he had felled the ox, the former threw the axe from him and fled, and the man who cut the beast's throat apparently imitated his example. Meantime the ox was skinned, and all present partook of its flesh. Then the hide was stuffed with straw and sewed up. Next, the stuffed animal was set on its feet and yoked to a plow as if it were plowing. A trial then took place in an ancient law court, presided over by the king, as he was called, to determine who had murdered the ox. The maidens who had brought the water accused the men who had sharpened the axe and knife. The men who had sharpened the axe and knife blamed the men who had handed these implements to the butchers. The men who had handed the implements to the butchers blamed the butchers, and the butchers laid the blame on the axe and knife, which were accordingly found guilty, condemned, and cast into the sea. The name of this sacrifice, the murder of the ox, the pains taken by each person who had a hand in the slaughter to lay the blame on someone else, together with the formal trial and punishment of the axe or knife, or both, proved that the ox was here regarded not merely as a victim offered to a god, but as itself a sacred creature, the slaughter of which was sacrilege or murder. This is borne out by a statement of Varro that to kill an ox was formerly a capital crime in Attica. The mode of selecting the victim suggests that the ox, which tasted the corn, was viewed as the corn deity taking possession of his own. This interpretation is supported by the following custom. In Bough, in the district of Orleans, on the 24th or 25th of April, they make a straw man called the Great Mondard, for they say that the old Mondard is now dead, and it is necessary to make a new one. The straw man is carried in solemn procession up and down the village, and at last is placed upon the oldest apple tree. There he remains till the apples are gathered, when he is taken down and thrown into the water, or he is burned, and his ashes cast into the water. but the person who plucks the first fruit from the tree succeeds to the title of the Great Mondard. Here, the straw figure, called the Great Mondard, and placed on the oldest apple tree in spring, represents the spirit of the tree, who, dead in winter, revives when the apple blossoms appear on the boughs. Thus, the person who plucks the first fruit from the tree and thereby receives the name of the Great Mondard must be regarded as a representative of the tree spirit. Primitive peoples are usually reluctant to taste the annual first fruits of any crop until some ceremony has been performed, which makes it safe and pious for them to do so. The reason of this reluctance appears to be a belief that the first fruits either belong to or actually contain a divinity. Therefore, when a man or animal is seen boldly to appropriate the sacred first fruits, he or it is naturally regarded as the divinity himself in human or animal form, taking possession of his own. The time of the Athenian sacrifice, which fell about the close of the threshing, suggests that the wheat and barley laid upon the altar were a harvest offering, and the sacramental character of the subsequent repast, all partaking of the flesh of the divine animal, would make it parallel to the harvest suppers of modern Europe, in which, as we have seen, the flesh of the animal, which stands for the corn spirit, is eaten by the harvesters. Again, the tradition that the sacrifice was instituted in order to put an end to drought and famine is in favor of taking it as a harvest festival. The resurrection of the corn spirit, enacted by setting up the stuffed ox and yoking it to the plow, may be compared with the resurrection of the tree spirit in the person of his representative, the wild man. The ox appears as a representative of the corn spirit in other parts of the world. At Great Bassam in Guinea, 2 oxen are slain annually to procure a good harvest. If the sacrifice is to be effectual, it is necessary that the oxen should weep. So all the women of the village sit in front of the beasts, chanting, "The ox will weep, yes, he will weep." From time to time, one of the women walks round the beasts, throwing manioc meal or palm wine upon them, especially into their eyes. When tears roll down from the eyes of the oxen, the people dance, singing, "The ox weeps, the ox weeps." Then 2 men seize the tails of the beasts and cut them off at one blow. It is believed that a great misfortune will happen in the course of the year if the tails are not severed at one blow. The oxen are afterwards killed and their flesh is eaten by the chiefs. Here, the tears of the oxen, like those of the human victims amongst the Khans and the Aztecs, are probably a rain charm. We have already seen that the virtue of the corn spirit, embodied in animal form, is sometimes supposed to reside in the tail, and that the last handful of corn is sometimes conceived as the tail of the corn spirit. In the Mithraic religion, this conception is graphically set forth in some of the numerous scriptures, which represent Mithras kneeling on the back of a bull and plunging a knife into its flank. For on certain of these monuments, the tail of the bull ends in 3 stalks of corn, and in one of them, corn stalks instead of blood are seen issuing from the wound inflicted by the knife. Such representations certainly suggest that the bull, whose sacrifice appears to have formed a leading feature in the Mithraic ritual, was conceived, in one at least of its aspects, as an incarnation of the corn spirit. Still more clearly does the ox appear as a personification of the corn spirit in a ceremony which is observed in all the provinces and districts of China to welcome the approach of spring. On the first day of spring, usually on the 3rd or 4th of February, which is also the beginning of the Chinese New Year, the governor or prefect of the city goes in procession to the east gate of the city and sacrifices to the divine husbandman, who is represented with a bull's head on the body of a man. A large effigy of an ox, cow, or buffalo has been prepared for the occasion and stands outside of the east gate with agricultural implements beside it. The figure is made of differently colored pieces of paper pasted on a framework, either by a blind man or according to the directions of a necromancer. The colors of the paper prognosticate the character of the coming year. If red prevails, there will be many fires. If white, there will be floods and rain, and so with the other colors. The mandarins walk slowly round the ox, beating it severely at each step with rods of various hues. It is filled with 5 kinds of grain, which pour forth when the effigy is broken by the blows of the rods. The paper fragments are then set on fire, and a scramble takes place for the burning fragments, because the people believe that whoever gets one of them is sure to be fortunate throughout the year. A live buffalo is next killed, and its flesh is divided among the mandarins. According to one account, the effigy of the ox is made of clay, and after being beaten by the governor, is stoned by the people till they break it in pieces, from which they expect an abundant ear. Here the corn spirit appears to be plainly represented by the corn-filled ox, whose fragments may therefore be supposed to bring fertility with them. On the whole, we may perhaps conclude that both as a goat and as a bull, Dionysus was essentially a god of vegetation. The Chinese and European customs, which I have cited, may perhaps shed light on the custom of rending a live bull or goat at the rites of Dionysus. The animal was torn in fragments, as the con victim was cut in pieces, in order that the worshippers might each secure a portion of the life-giving and fertilizing influence of the god. The flesh was eaten raw as a sacrament, and we may conjecture that some of it was taken home to be buried in the fields or otherwise employed, so as to convey to the fruits of the earth the quickening influence of the god of vegetation. The resurrection of Dionysus related in this myth may have been enacted in his rites by stuffing and setting up the slain ox, as was done at the Athenian Bouphonia. Subsection 2. Demeter, the pig, and the horse. Passing next to the corn goddess Demeter, and remembering that in European folklore the pig is a common embodiment of the corn spirit, we may now ask whether the pig, which was so closely associated with Demeter, may not have been originally the goddess herself in animal form. The pig was sacred to her. In art she was portrayed carrying or accompanied by a pig. The pig was regularly sacrificed in her mysteries, the reason assigned being that the pig injures the corn and is therefore an enemy of the goddess. But after an animal has been conceived as a god or a god as an animal, it sometimes happens, as we have seen, that the god sloughs off his animal form and becomes purely anthropomorphic, and that when the animal, which at first had been slain in the character of the god, comes to be viewed as a victim offered to the god on the ground of its hostility to the deity. In short, the god is sacrificed to himself on the ground that he is his own enemy. This happens to Dionysus, and it may have happened to Demeter also. And in fact, the rites of one of her festivals, the Thesmophoria, bear out the view that originally the pig was an embodiment of the corn goddess herself, either Demeter or her daughter, and double Persephone. The Attic Thesmophoria was an autumn festival celebrated by women alone in October, and appears to have represented with mourning rites the descent of Persephone or Demeter into the lower world, and with joy her return from the dead. Hence the name descent or ascent variously applied to the first, and the name Kalengenia, Fairborn, applied to the third day of the festival. Now it was customary at the Thesmophoria to throw pigs, cakes of dough, and branches of pine into the chasm of Demeter and Persephone, which appear to have been sacred caverns or vaults. In these caverns or vaults there were said to be serpents, which guarded the caverns and consumed most of the flesh of the pigs and dough cakes which were thrown in. Afterwards, apparently at the next annual festival, the decayed remains of the pigs, the cakes, and the pine branches were fetched by women called drawers, who, after observing rules of ceremonial purity for 3 days, descended into the caverns, and frightening away the serpents by clapping their hands, brought up the remains, and placed them on the altar. Whoever got a piece of the decayed flesh and cakes, and sowed it with the seed corn in his fields, was believed to be sure of a good crop. To explain the rude and ancient ritual of the Thesmophoria, the following legend was told. At the moment when Pluto carried off Persephone, a swineherd called Eubuleus chanced to be herding his swine on the spot, and his herd was engulfed in the chasm down which Pluto vanished with Persephone. Accordingly, at the Thesmophoria, pigs were annually thrown into the caverns to commemorate the disappearance of the swine of Eubuleus. It follows from this that the casting of the pigs into the vaults at the Thesmophoria formed part of the dramatic representation of Persephone's descent into the lower world, and as no image of Persephone appears to have been thrown in, we may infer that the descent of the pigs was not so much an accompaniment of her descent as the descent itself. In short, that the pigs were Persephone. Afterwards, when Persephone or Demeter, for the two are equivalent, took on human form, a reason had to be found for the custom of throwing pigs into caverns at her festival. And this was done by saying that when Pluto carried off Persephone, there happened to be some swine browsing near, which were swallowed up along with her. The story is obviously a forced and awkward attempt to bridge over the gulf between the old conception of the corn spirit as a pig and the new conception of her as an anthropomorphic goddess. A trace of the older conception survived in the legend that when the sad mother was searching for traces of the vanished Persephone, the footprints of the lost one were obliterated by the footprints of a pig. Originally, we may conjecture, the footprints of the pig were the footprints of Persephone and of Demeter herself. A consciousness of the intimate connection of the pig with the corn lurks in the legend that the swineherd Eubuleus was the brother of Triptolemus, to whom Demeter first imparted the secret of the corn. Indeed, according to one version of the story, Eubuleus himself received jointly with his brother Triptolemus the gift of the corn from Demeter as a reward for revealing to her the fate of Persephone. Further, it is to be noted that at the Thesmophoria, the women appear to have eaten swine's flesh. The meal, if I am right, must have been a solemn sacrament or communion, the worshippers partaking of the body of the god. As thus explained, the Thesmophoria has its analogies in the folk customs of Northern Europe, which have been already described. Just as the Thesmophoria, an autumn festival in honor of the corn goddess, swine's flesh was partly eaten, partly kept in caverns till the following year, when it was taken up to be sown with the seed corn in the fields for the purpose of securing a good crop. So in the neighborhood of Grenoble, the goat killed on the harvest field is partly eaten at the harvest supper, partly pickled, and kept till the next harvest. So at Puy, the ox killed on the harvest field is partly eaten by the harvesters, partly pickled, and kept till the first day of sowing in spring, probably to be then mixed with the seed, or eaten by the plowman, or both. So at Udvarhele, the feathers of the cock, which is killed in the last sheaf at harvest, are kept till spring, and then sown with the seed on the field. So in Hesse and Meiningen, the flesh of pigs is eaten on Ash Wednesday, or Candlemas, and the bones are kept till sowing time, when they are put into the field, sown or mixed with the seed in the bag. So, lastly, the corn from the last sheaf is kept till Christmas, made into the Yule boar, and afterwards broken and mixed with the seed corn at sowing in spring. Thus, to put it generally, the corn spirit is killed in animal form in autumn. Part of his flesh is eaten as a sacrament by his worshippers, and part of it is kept till next sowing time or harvest as a pledge and security for the continuance or renewal of the corn spirit's energies. If persons of fastidious taste should object that the Greeks never could have conceived Demeter and Persephone to be embodied in the form of pigs, it may be answered that in the cave of Phigalia in Arcadia, the black Demeter was portrayed with the head and mane of a horse on the body of a woman. Between the portraits of a goddess as a pig and the portrait of her as a woman with a horse's head, there is little to choose in respect of barbarism. The legend told of the Phigalian Demeter indicates that the horse was one of the animal forms assumed in ancient Greece, as in modern Europe, by the corn spirit. It was said that in her search for her daughter, Demeter assumed the form of a mare to escape the addresses of Poseidon, and that, offended at his importunity, she withdrew in dudgeon to a cave not far from Phigalia in the highlands of western Arcadia. There, robed in black, she tarried so long that the fruits of the earth were perishing, and mankind would have died of famine if Pan had not soothed the angry goddess and persuaded her to quit the cave. In memory of this event, the Phigalians set up an image of the black Demeter in the cave. It represented a woman dressed in a long robe, with the head and mane of a horse. The black Demeter, in whose absence the fruits of the earth perish, is plainly a mythical expression for the bare wintry earth, stripped of its summer mantle of green. Subsection 3. Attis, Adonis, and the pig. Passing now to Attis and Adonis, we may note a few facts which seem to show that these deities of vegetation had also, like other deities of the same class, their animal embodiments. The worshippers of Attis abstained from eating the flesh of swine. This appears to indicate that the pig was regarded as an embodiment of Attis, and the legend that Attis was killed by a boar points in the same direction. For after the examples of the goat Dionysus and the pig Demeter, it may almost be laid down as a rule that an animal which is said to have injured a god was originally the god himself. Perhaps the cry of Hyasatis, Hyasatis, which was raised by the worshippers of Attis, may be neither more nor less than Pig Attis, Hyas being possibly a Frisian form of the Greek Hais, a pig. In regard to Adonis, his connection with the boar was not always explained by the story that he had been killed by the animal. According to another story, a boar rent with his tusk the bark of the tree in which the infant Adonis was born. According to yet another story, he perished at the hands of Hephaestus on Mount Lebanon while he was hunting wild boars. These variations in the legend serve to show that while the connection of the boar with Adonis was certain, the reason of the connection was not understood, and that consequently different stories were devised to explain it. Certainly, the pig ranked as a sacred animal among the Syrians. At the great religious metropolis of Hierapolis on the Euphrates, pigs were neither sacrificed nor eaten, and if a man touched a pig, he was unclean for the rest of the day. Some people said this was because the pigs were unclean. Others said it was because the pigs were sacred. The difference of opinion points to a hazy state of religious thought in which the ideas of sanctity and uncleanness are not yet sharply distinguished, both being blent in a sort of vaporous solution to which we give the name of taboo. It is quite consistent with this that the pig should have been held to be an embodiment of the divine Adonis, and the analogies of Dionysus and Demeter make it probable that the story of the hostility of the animal to the god was only a late misapprehension of the old view of the god as embodied in a pig. The rule that pigs were not sacrificed or eaten by worshippers of Attis, and presumably of Adonis, does not exclude the possibility that, in these rituals, the pig was slain on solemn occasions as a representative of the god, and consumed sacramentally by the worshippers. Indeed, the sacramental killing and eating of an animal implies that the animal is sacred, and that, as a general rule, it is spared. The attitude of the Jews to the pig was as ambiguous as that of the heathen Syrians towards the same animal. The Greeks could not decide whether the Jews worshipped swine or abominated them. On one hand, they might not eat swine, but on the other hand, they might not kill them. And if the former rule speaks for the uncleanness, the latter speaks still more strongly for the sanctity of the animal. For whereas both rules may, and one rule must, be explained on the supposition that the pig was sacred, neither rule must, and one rule cannot, be explained on the supposition that the pig was unclean. If therefore we prefer the former supposition, we must conclude that, originally at least, the pig was revered rather than abhorred by the Israelites. We are confirmed in this opinion by observing that down to the time of Isaiah, some of the Jews used to meet secretly in gardens to eat the flesh of swine and mice as a religious rite. Doubtless, this was a very ancient ceremony, dating from a time when both the pig and the mouse were venerated as divine, and when their flesh was partaken of sacramentally on rare and solemn occasions as the body and blood of gods, and in general it may perhaps be said that all so-called unclean animals were originally sacred. The reason for not eating them was that they were divine. Subsection 4. Osiris, the pig, and the bull. In ancient Egypt, within historical times, the pig occupied the same dubious position as in Syria and Palestine, though at first sight its uncleanness is more prominent than its sanctity. The Egyptians are generally said by Greek writers to have abhorred the pig as a foul and loathsome animal. If a man so much as touched a pig in passing, he stepped into the river with all his clothes on to wash off the taint. To drink pig's milk was believed to cause leprosy to the drinker. Swineherds, though natives of Egypt, were forbidden to enter any temple, and they were the only men who were thus excluded. No one would give his daughter in marriage to a swineherd or marry a swineherd's daughter. The swineherds married among themselves. Yet once a year the Egyptians sacrificed pigs to the moon and to Osiris, and not only sacrificed them, but ate of their flesh, though on any other day of the year they would neither sacrifice them nor taste of their flesh. Those who were too poor to offer a pig on this day baked cakes of dough and offered them instead. This can hardly be explained except by the supposition that the pig was a sacred animal, which was eaten sacramentally by the worshippers once a year. The view that in Egypt the pig was sacred is borne out by the very facts which, to moderns, might seem to prove the contrary. Thus, the Egyptians thought, as we have seen, that to drink pig's milk produced leprosy. But exactly analogous views were held by savages about the animals and plants which they deemed most sacred. Thus, in the island of Watar, between New Guinea and Celebes, people believed themselves to be variously descended from wild pigs, serpents, crocodiles, turtles, dogs, and eels. A man may not eat an animal of the kind from which he is descended. If he does so, he will become a leper and go mad. Amongst the Omaha Indians of North America, men whose totem is the elk believe that if they ate the flesh of the male elk, they would break out in boils and white spots in different parts of their bodies. In the same tribe, men whose totem is the red maize think that if they ate red maize, they would have running sores all around their mouths. The bush people of Suriname, who practice totemism, believe that if they ate the kapaye, an animal like a pig, it would give them leprosy. Perhaps the kapaye is one of their totems. The Syrians in antiquity, who esteemed fish sacred, thought that if they ate fish, their bodies would break out in ulcers, and their feet and stomach would swell up. The Chassis of Orissa believed that if they were to injure their totemic animal, they would be attacked by leprosy, and their line would die out. These examples prove that the eating of a sacred animal is often believed to produce leprosy or other skin diseases. So far, therefore, they support the view that the pig must have been sacred in Egypt, since the effect of drinking its milk was believed to be leprosy. Again, the rule that, after touching a pig, a man had to wash himself and his clothes also favors the view of the sanctity of the pig, for it is common belief that the effect of contact with a sacred object must be removed by washing or otherwise before a man is free to mingle with his fellows. Thus, the Jews washed their hands after reading the sacred scriptures. Before coming forth from the tabernacle after the sin offering, the high priest had to wash himself and put off the garments which he had worn in the holy place. It was a rule of the Greek ritual that in offering an expiatory sacrifice, the sacrificer should not touch the sacrifice, and that after the offering was made, he must wash his body and his clothes in a river or spring before he could enter a city or his own house. The Polynesians felt strongly the need of ridding themselves of the sacred contagion, if it may be so called, which they caught by touching sacred objects. Various ceremonies were performed for the purpose of removing this contagion. We have seen, for example, how in Tonga, a man who happened to touch a sacred chief or anything personally belonging to him had to perform a certain ceremony before he could feed himself with his hands. Otherwise, it was believed that he would swell up and die, or at least be affiliated with scrofula or some other disease. We have seen, too, that fatal effects are supposed to follow, and do actually follow, from contact with a sacred object in New Zealand. In short, primitive man believes that what is sacred is dangerous. It is pervaded by a sort of electrical sanctity, which communicates a shock to, even if it does not kill, whatever comes in contact with it. Hence, the savage is unwilling to touch or even to see that which he deems peculiarly holy. Thus, Bechuanas of the crocodile clan think it hateful and unlucky to meet or see a crocodile. The sight is thought to cause inflammation of the eyes, yet the crocodile is their most sacred object. They call it their father, swear by it, and celebrate it in their festivals. The goat is the sacred animal of the Madanesana Bushmen. Yet, to look upon it would be to render the man for the time impure, as well as to cause him undefined uneasiness. The elk clan among the Omaha Indians believe that even to touch the male elk would be followed by an eruption of boils and white spots on the body. Members of the reptile clan in the same tribe think that if one of them touches or smells a snake, it will make his hair white. In Samoa, people whose god was a butterfly believed that if they caught a butterfly, it would strike them dead. Again, in Samoa, the reddish seared leaves of the banana tree were commonly used as plates for handing food, but if any member of the wild pigeon family had used banana leaves for this purpose, it was supposed that he would suffer from rheumatic swellings or an eruption all over the body like chickenpox. The Mori clan of the Bhils in central India worship the peacock as their totem and make offerings of grain to it, yet members of the clan believe that were they even to set foot on the tracks of a peacock, they would afterwards suffer from some disease, and if a woman sees a peacock, she must veil her face and look away. Thus, the primitive mind seems to conceive of holiness as a sort of dangerous virus, which a prudent man will shun as far as possible, and of which, if he should chance to be infected by it, he will carefully disinfect himself by some form of ceremonial purification. In the light of these parallels, the beliefs and customs of the Egyptians touching the pigs are probably to be explained as based upon an opinion of the extreme sanctity rather than of extreme uncleanness of the animal, or rather, to put it more correctly, they imply that the animal was looked on not simply as a filthy and disgusting creature, but as a being endowed with high supernatural powers, and that as such it was regarded with that primitive sentiment of religious awe and fear in which the feelings of reverence and abhorrence are almost equally blended. The ancients themselves seem to have been aware that there was another side to the horror with which swine seemed to inspire the Egyptians. For the Greek astronomer and mathematician Eudoxus, who resided 14 months in Egypt and conversed with the priests, was of opinion that the Egyptians spared the pig not out of abhorrence, but from a regard to its utility in agriculture. For according to him, when the Nile was subsided, herdsmen of swine were turned loose over the fields to tread the seed down into the moist earth. But when a being is thus the object of mixed and implicitly contradictory feelings, he may be said to occupy a position of unstable equilibrium. In course of time, one of the contradictory feelings is likely to prevail over the other, and according as the feeling which finally predominates is that of reverence or abhorrence, the being who is the object of it will rise into a god or sink into a devil. The latter, on the whole, was the fate of the pig in Egypt. For in historical times, the fear and horror of the pig seems certainly to have outweighed the reverence and worship of which he may once have been the object, and of which, even in his fallen state, he never quite lost trace. He came to be looked on as an embodiment of Set or Typhon, the Egyptian devil and enemy of Osiris, for it was in the shape of a black pig that Typhon injured the eye of the god Horus, who burned him and instituted the sacrifice of the pig, the sun god Ra having declared the beast abominable. Again, the story that Typhon was hunting a boar when he discovered and mangled the body of Osiris, and that this was the reason why pigs were sacrificed once a year, is clearly a modernized version of an older story that Osiris, like Adonis and Attis, was slain or mangled by a boar, or by Typhon in the form of a boar. Thus, the annual sacrifice of a pig to Osiris might naturally be interpreted as vengeance inflicted on the hostile animal that had slain or mangled the god. But in the first place, when an animal is thus killed as a solemn sacrifice, once and once only in the year, it generally or always means that the animal is divine, that he is spared and respected the rest of the year as a god, and slain when he is slain, also in the character of a god. In the second place, the examples of Dionysus and Demeter, if not of Attis and Adonis, have taught us that the animal which is sacrificed to a god on the ground that he is the god's enemy may have been, and probably was, originally the god himself. Therefore, the annual sacrifice of a pig to Osiris, coupled with the alleged hostility of the animal to the god, tends to show, first, that originally the pig was a god, and second, that he was Osiris. At the later age, when Osiris became anthropomorphic and his original relation to the pig had been forgotten, the animal was first distinguished from him and afterwards opposed as an enemy to him by mythologists, who could think of no reason for killing a beast in connection with the worship of a god except that the beast was the god's enemy. Or, as Plutarch puts it, not that which is dear to the gods, but that which is the contrary, is fit to be sacrificed. At this later stage, the havoc which a wild boar notoriously makes amongst the corn would supply a plausible reason for regarding him as the foe of the corn spirit, though originally, if I am right, the very freedom with which the boar ranged at will through the corn led people to identify him with the corn spirit, to whom he was afterwards opposed as an enemy. The view which identifies the pig with Osiris derives not a little support from the sacrifice of pigs to him on the very day on which, according to tradition, Osiris himself was killed. For thus the killing of the pig was the annual representation of the killing of Osiris, just as the throwing of the pigs into the caverns at the Thesmophoria was an annual representation of the descent of Persephone into the lower world, and both customs are parallel to the European practice of killing a goat, cock, and so forth at harvest as a representative of the corn spirit. Again, the theory that the pig, originally Osiris himself, afterwards came to be regarded as an embodiment of his enemy Typhon, is supported by the similar relation of red-haired men and red oxen to Typhon. For in regard to the red-haired men who were burned and whose ashes were scattered with winnowing fans, we have seen fair grounds for believing that originally, like the red-haired puppies killed at Rome in spring, they were representatives of the corn spirit himself, that is, of Osiris, and were slain for the express purpose of making the corn turn red or golden. Yet at a later time, these men were explained to be representatives, not of Osiris, but of his enemy Typhon, and the killing of them was regarded as an act of vengeance, inflicted on the enemy of the god. Similarly, the red oxen sacrificed by the Egyptians were said to be offered on the ground of their resemblance to Typhon, though it is more likely that originally they were slain on the ground of their resemblance to the corn spirit Osiris. We have seen that the ox is a common representative of the corn spirit, and is slain as such on the harvest field. Osiris was regularly identified with the bull Apis of Memphis and the bull Mnevis of Heliopolis, but it is hard to say whether these bulls were embodiments of him as the corn spirit, as the red oxen appear to have been, or whether they were not, in origin, entirely distinct deities, who came to be fused with Osiris at a later time. The universality of the worship of these two bulls seems to put them on a different footing from the ordinary sacred animals whose worships are purely local. But whatever the original relation of Apis to Osiris may have been, there is one fact about the former which ought not to be passed over in a disquisition on the custom of killing a god. Although the bull Apis was worshipped as a god with much pomp and profound reverence, he was not suffered to live beyond a certain length of time, which was prescribed by the sacred books, and on the expiry of which he was drowned in a holy spring. The limit, according to Plutarch, was 25 years, but it cannot always have been enforced, for the tombs of the Apis bulls have been discovered in modern times, and from the inscriptions on them it appears that in the 22nd dynasty 2 of the holy steers lived more than 26 years. Subsection 5. Virbius and the horse. We are now in a position to hazard a conjecture as to the meaning of the tradition that Virbius, the first of the divine kings of the wood at Aricia, had been killed in the character of Hippolytus by horses, having found, first, that spirits of the corn are not infrequently represented in the form of horses, and second, that the animal, which in later legends is said to have injured the god, was sometimes originally the god himself. We may conjecture that the horses by which Virbius, or Hippolytus, was said to have been slain were really embodiments of him as a deity of vegetation. The myth that he had been killed by horses was probably invented to explain certain features in his worship, amongst others the custom of excluding horses from his sacred grove. For myth changes while custom remains constant. Men continue to do what their fathers did before them, though the reasons on which their fathers acted have been long forgotten. The history of religion is a long attempt to reconcile old custom with new reason, to find a sound theory for an absurd practice. In the case before us, we may be sure that the myth is more modern than the custom, and by no means represents the original reason for excluding horses from the grove. From their exclusions, it might be inferred that horses could not be the sacred animals or embodiments of the god of the grove, but the inference would be rash. The goat was at one time a sacred animal or embodiment of Athena, as may be inferred from the practice of representing the goddess clad in a goatskin, aegis. Yet the goat was neither sacrificed to her as a rule, nor allowed to enter her great sanctuary, the Acropolis at Athens. The reason alleged for this was that the goat injured the olive, the sacred tree of Athena. So far, therefore, the relation of the goat to Athena is parallel to the relation of the horse to Virbius, both animals being excluded from the sanctuary on the ground of injury done by them to the god. But from Varro we learn that there was an exception to the rule which excluded the goat from the Acropolis. Once a year, he says, the goat was driven on to the Acropolis for a necessary sacrifice. Now, as has been remarked before, when an animal is sacrificed once and once only in the year, it is probably slain not as a victim offered to the god, but as a representative of the god himself. Therefore, we may infer that if a goat was sacrificed on the Acropolis once a year, it was sacrificed in the character of Athena herself, and it may be conjectured that the skin of the sacrificed animal was placed on the statue of the goddess and formed the aegis, which would thus be renewed annually. Similarly, at Thebes in Egypt, rams were sacred and were not sacrificed, but on one day in the year a ram was killed, and its skin was placed on the statue of the god Ammon. Now, if we knew the ritual of the Aretian Grove better, we might find that the rule of excluding horses from it, like the rule of excluding goats from the Acropolis at Athens, was subject to an annual exception, a horse being once a year taken into the grove and sacrificed as an embodiment of the god Virbius. By the usual misunderstanding, the horse thus killed would come in time to be regarded as an enemy offered up in sacrifice to the god whom he had injured, like the pig, which was sacrificed to Demeter and Osiris, or the goat, which was sacrificed to Dionysus, and possibly to Athena. It is so easy for a writer to record a rule without noticing an exception that we need not wonder at finding the rule of the Aretian Grove recorded without any mention of an exception, such as I suppose. If we had had only the statements of Athenaeus and Pliny, we should have known only the rule which forbade the sacrifice of goats to Athena, and excluded them from the Acropolis, without being aware of the important exception which the fortunate preservation of Varro's work has revealed to us. The conjecture that once a year a horse may have been sacrificed in the Aretian Grove as a representative of the deity of the grove derives some support from the similar sacrifice of a horse which took place once a year at Rome. On the 15th of October in each year, a chariot race was run on the field of Mars. Stabbed with a spear, the right-hand horse of the victorious team was then sacrificed to Mars for the purpose of ensuring good crops, and its head was cut off and adorned with a string of loaves. Thereupon the inhabitants of two wards, the Sacred Way and the Subura, contended with each other who should get the head. If the people of the Sacred Way got it, they fastened it to a wall of the king's house. If the people of the Subura got it, they fastened it to the Mammalian Tower. The horse's tail was cut off and carried to the king's house with such speed that the blood dripped on the earth of the house. Further, it appears that the blood of the horse was caught and preserved till the 21st of April, when the Vestal virgins mixed it with the blood of the unborn calves, which had been sacrificed 6 days before. The mixture was then distributed to shepherds and used by them for fumigating their flocks. In this ceremony, the decorations of the horse's head with a string of loaves and the alleged object of the sacrifice, namely to procure a good harvest, seemed to indicate that the horse was killed as one of those animal representatives of the corn spirit of which we have found so many examples. The custom of cutting off the horse's tail is like the African custom of cutting off the tails of the oxen and sacrificing them to obtain a good crop. In both the Roman and African custom, the animal apparently stands for the corn spirit, and its fructifying power is supposed to reside especially in its tail. The latter idea occurs, as we have seen, in European folklore. Again, the practice of fumigating the cattle in spring with the blood of the horse may be compared with the practice of giving the old wife the maiden or the clyax sheaf as fodder to the horses in spring, or the cattle at Christmas, and giving the Yule boar to the plowing oxen or horses to eat in spring. All these usages aim at ensuring the blessing of the corn spirit on the homestead and its inmates, and storing it up for another year. The Roman sacrifice of the October horse, as it was called, carries us back to the early days when the Subura, afterwards a low and squalid quarter of the great metropolis, was still a separate village, whose inhabitants engaged in a friendly contest on the harvest field with their neighbors of Rome, then a little rural town. The field of Mars on which the ceremony took place lay beside the Tiber and formed part of the king's domain down to the abolition of the monarchy, for tradition ran that at the time when the last of the kings was driven from Rome, the corn stood ripe for the sickle on the crown lands beside the river, but no one would eat the cursed grain, and it was flung into the river in such heaps that, the water being low with the summer heat, it formed the nucleus of an island. The horse sacrifice was thus an old autumn custom observed upon the king's cornfields at the end of the harvest. The tail and blood of the horse, as the chief parts of the corn spirit's representative, were taken to the king's house and kept there, just as in Germany the harvest cock is nailed on the gable or over the door of the farmhouse, and as the last sheaf in the form of the maiden is carried home and kept over the fireplace in the Highlands of Scotland. Thus the blessing of the corn spirit was brought to the king's house and hearth, and through them to the community of which he was the head. Similarly, in the spring and autumn customs of Northern Europe, the maypole is sometimes set up in front of the house of the mayor or burgomaster, and the last sheaf at harvest is brought to him as the head of the village. But while the tail and blood fell to the king, the neighboring village of the Subura, which no doubt once had a similar ceremony of its own, was gratified by being allowed to compete for the prize of the horse's head. The mammalian tower, to which the Suburans nailed the horse's head when they succeeded in carrying it off, appears to have been a peel tower, or keep of the old mammalian family, the magnates of the village. The ceremony thus performed on the king's fields and at his house on behalf of the whole town and of the neighboring village presupposes a time when each township performed a similar ceremony on its own fields. In the rural districts of Latium, the villages may have continued to observe the custom, each on its own land, long after the Roman hamlets had merged their separate harvest homes in the common celebration on the king's lands. There is no intrinsic improbability in the supposition that the sacred grove of Aricia, like the field of Mars at Rome, may have been the scene of a common harvest celebration, at which a horse was sacrificed, with the same rude rites on behalf of the neighboring villages. The horse would represent the fructifying spirit both of the tree and of the corn, for the two ideas melt into each other, as we see in customs like the Harvest May. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Midwest Covencast Presents Weekend Reads. We will be back in 2 weeks with our next installment. In the meantime, you can catch up with our other pod, Midwest Covencast. Consider supporting Midwest Covencast and Weekend Reads on our Patreon to gain access to additional content and exclusive Coven merch. You can even join our Coven by following us on social media at Midwest Covencast on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, and at Midwest Coven on Twitter. You can also keep up with us on our website, MidwestCovencast.com. Until next time, Coven, blessed be.